What if an economic miracle isn't a miracle at all? Just a bubble that hasn't popped yet? For a decade, Ireland was Europe's success story. Low taxes, tech giants, rising salaries, endless construction, the Celtic Tiger, a country that went from poverty to prosperity faster than almost anyone thought possible. But underneath the glass offices and luxury apartments, something fragile was forming. And when the global crisis hit in 2008, Ireland discovered a brutal truth. It hadn't just built an economy. It had built a property bet. The making of the tiger. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to the 1990s. Because Ireland's boom didn't start as a bubble. It started as a transformation. For decades, Ireland had been one of Western Europe's poorest countries. High unemployment, mass immigration, limited industry. Then policy shifted. Corporate taxes were slashed. Education investment increased. Foreign companies were invited in aggressively, and they came. American tech firms, pharmaceutical giants, financial services, exports surged, jobs multiplied, optimism returned. For the first time in generations, young Irish workers weren't leaving. They were staying. And that's when growth quietly turned into something else. The foundation. Ireland's rise was real, which made the risks easier to ignore. Money poured in, living standards climbed, optimism became cultural. But growth has a side effect. It raises expectations, and expectations demand acceleration. From boom to frenzy. By the early 2000s, something shifted. The economy was no longer just expanding. It was overheating. Cheap Eurozone credit flooded the country. Mortgages became effortless. Why rent? Property only goes up. Buy now or be priced out forever. Developers bought land aggressively. Banks financed them eagerly. Homebuyers stretched further each year. Houses didn't just appreciate. They doubled, then doubled again. Construction became Ireland's heartbeat. Cranes weren't symbols of growth anymore. They were symbols of belief. And belief is powerful fuel. The property illusion. Here's the problem with property booms. They feel rational while they're happening. Rising prices create paper wealth. Homeowners feel richer. They borrow more. They spend more. Banks see rising collateral. They lend more. Developers see demand. They build more. A feedback loop. Irish banks didn't just participate. They concentrated in it. The tiger was no longer sprinting on productivity. It was balancing on property prices. The global shock. Then came 2008. Global credit froze. Irish banks depended on international borrowing. When liquidity dried up, that lifeline snapped. Property prices stopped rising. Then they fell. Developers couldn't repay loans. Homeowners slipped into negative equity. Construction halted mid-project. Ghost estates, entire housing developments, stood half-finished across the countryside. Families who had bought at the peak drove past empty streets, realizing their homes were now worth a fraction of their loans. The cranes disappeared. Silence replaced optimism. The guarantee. In September 2008, the government faced a decision. Its banks were collapsing. Depositors were nervous. Investors were fleeing. Officials feared total panic. So they made a move that would define the crisis. They didn't just protect depositors. They protected bondholders, developers, international lenders. They guaranteed debts larger than the entire Irish economy. Overnight, a banking crisis became a sovereign one. It was meant to calm markets. Instead, it tied the fate of the country to the fate of its property bubble. When bank losses ballooned, they became public losses. Private risk became national debt. Losses created in boardrooms were now owed by teachers, nurses, and future taxpayers. The collapse. By 2010, the scale of the disaster was clear. Property prices had fallen more than 50% in some areas. Banks required enormous bailouts. The budget deficit exploded. Unemployment surged past 15%. The same generation that had celebrated opportunity a few years earlier was suddenly packing bags for Australia, Canada, anywhere that offered work. The miracle had reversed. Ireland went from Europe's star pupil to its cautionary tale. Bond markets lost confidence. Eventually, Ireland requested an international bailout. The bill had arrived. The human cost. Economic collapse isn't abstract. Couples postponed families. Young graduates moved back into childhood bedrooms. Small businesses that depended on the boom simply vanished. Families who bought at peak prices were trapped, owing more than their homes were worth. Construction workers lost jobs overnight. Public anger rose. How had success turned into crisis so fast? It wasn't one reckless decision. It was accumulation. Confidence without constraint. Growth without balance. Banking without diversification. The structural flaw. Many countries had property bubbles. Ireland's difference was concentration. Its banks were deeply exposed. Its late-stage boom leaned heavily on construction. And inside the Eurozone, monetary policy wasn't tailored for Ireland. Cheap money in good times. Painful rigidity in bad times. The slow recovery. But here's what many forget. Ireland did recover. Painfully. Gradually. Banks were restructured. Bad loans isolated. Foreign investment remained. By the mid-2010s, growth returned. But the mindset had changed. The cranes came back, cautiously. Ireland had learned something expensive. Growth driven by productivity is resilient. Growth driven by asset prices is fragile. The lesson of the tiger. The Celtic Tiger wasn't a fraud. Ireland transformed itself. Ireland did recover. The memory didn't. And caution became permanent. Because booms feel safest at their peak. And the most dangerous word in finance isn't risk. It's always. Because sometimes a miracle is just a bubble, waiting for gravity. If you want to keep exploring the stories of cities, economies, and power, like and subscribe. The next story is already waiting.